everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. What's going on, everyone? How are you enjoying fascism? It has not personally, ICE has not rounded me up yet, so I'm still dealing with just the little things in life, like this week, our cat Squee was, hi Mabel, our cat Squee was constipated, so I drove him every day to the vet for enemas. We called it Enema Day Camp. So that was my week, was cleaning up little bits of poop here and driving a constipated cat to the vet. And that's America 2025. You know what has given me some relief from all this fecal madness, both societally and physically, felinely? Today's episode. That's right. Today's episode is fantastic. It's Daniel Littleton, and if you don't know who Daniel is, I'm going to read you his bio right now. Originally from Annapolis, Maryland, musician Daniel Littleton's first band, The Hated, was part of the first wave of hardcore / post-punk / emo, what have you, in the 1980s. In 1991, Daniel and Elizabeth Mitchell began recording together as Ida. They released their first 3 albums on the formative indie label Simple Machines, and as the 90s progressed, they became loosely associated with a wave of chamber pop bands. Do you remember that in the 90s? I don't think they specifically were all part of a movement together. I just think there happened to be a lot of chamber pop in the 90s, and someone at Wire magazine or whatever was like, there's a wave of chamber pop. At least that was my theory with the New Weird America movement. Do you remember that? They were just a bunch of weird folk bands in the early aughts, and then they got grouped together as New Weird America. Anyway, enough editorializing. Where was I? Their next 5 albums were released on labels like Polyvinyl and Tiger Style Records, and in the late aughts, the band went on hiatus. Recently, though, they began performing again in support of Numero Group's 4LP reissue of their 4th album, Will You Find Me? I've been a fan of Ida's since the 90s. I think I saw them at a small, I want to say it was at this toy store, like a toy that had vintage toys on the south side of Pittsburgh when I was in college. And I think they played there. And I've been a fan ever since. Originally, this was supposed to be Daniel and Elizabeth, and I was kind of surprised. I popped on the Zoom, and it was just Daniel, and there was a bit of confusion at first, but we got beyond it about how shitty Annapolis was in the 80s, where Daniel grew up, and a lot of other stuff. I won't spoil it. You're going to hear the interview in about 30 seconds. But before we get there, just want to tell you about a couple guests coming up. What do we got on deck? Why, comics writer Mark Russell and indie comics guy Rory Blank. Those were great. Selwyn Seyfu Hines, who's a very cool showrunner and former editor of The Source. Carson McCone. I love her albums. So stay tuned for all of that. But for now, let's talk to Daniel. In New York?
Upstate New York.
Nice.
Woodstock.
Oh, great.
So right near the home of, Big Pink and all of that.
Wait, what's Big Pink?
You don't know about Big Pink?
No. Now I feel, you know what? When I was younger, I would have pretended to know what you were talking about. And I would I would have bluffed my way through it. And then I would have been like, I would have looked it up afterwards. But I've been through therapy over a decade. I can admit I do not know what that is, and it doesn't make me less of a person.
It doesn't make you less of a person. There's no way that that's the case. I'm also just going to send you back to school with that one, because you're going to either kick yourself for what you've missed so far, or you're going to be really, really glad that I hooked you up. But at any rate, Bob Dylan, the band, made this, and the group, the band, they were his band. You might know about that. And when he went electric, they were called the Hawks, and they were kind of like this raucous rock and roll band from the South and from Canada, and they kind of were this ferocious, scrappy, mind blowing, just rip it up band. And so Dylan got them to be his backup band. And then when he moved to Woodstock and had a famous kind of motorcycle accident that put him out of commission, they all moved into this house called Big Pink. And they just played and wrote shit together every day for like months and months. And the bootleg tapes of that are just all kind of legend for many years. It's all out there now and people know about it, but for years it was just kind of like a rumor. But they were like a band in seclusion, like teaching themselves shit that each of them could remember from their childhoods, or popular songs that were on the radio, or they were just writing new shit every day and living together. And so it was kind of like the original art colony commune collective kind of approach for like a rock and roll setting, where like this, Bob Dylan was a really big deal at that point, but he just kind of disappeared and stopped playing shows and moved to the mountains and wrote shit with a bunch of his bros. And so like the kind of legend around it is because hours and hours of these tapes got made, and they sent songs out and people covered them and had hits with them. But they just kind of holed up in the mountains and did their own thing. And out of that came the band, who made music from Big Pink and a bunch of their classic records. And so it's just kind of like a moment up here when Jimi Hendrix lived up here and Dylan in the band and Janis Joplin. It's kind of like this was a spot where a lot of activity was focused, and then it just kind of, in a lot of ways, ended. And so, the way that every scene does, just kind of implodes with drugs and insanity and overexposure. But all of them, went on to do incredible things. But there was just this kind of window in the mid '60s where something kind of wild happened up here. And I think the repercussions of it are just legion. They're everywhere.
Now, was that cool for you? And I ask this because you're slightly older than me.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, Bob Dylan was my dad's music. So I mercilessly made fun of him whenever my dad would play it in the car. And I was like, this sucks. So I think there's a large gap in my knowledge of if my parents liked it, outside of like stuff that was to me undeniable, like say the Beatles. Right. I was like, fuck this.
Sure. As you should. I mean, that's the birth of rock and roll right there, is like you just being bored with your parents' shit. So of course, for me, I was closer to D. Boone and the Minutemen's time and generation. And so, I felt more like D. Boone felt like when he sang, my story could be his songs, I'm his soldier child, about Bob Dylan, like not because it was just, that was the only thing, but it definitely was significant what he and many people did. I mean, I'd say the same thing about so many artists that I grew up with that were as remote to me. I don't know. When did you come up? When were you arguing with your dad about the Beatles? Come clean.
Let's see here. This is going to have to be, I'm trying to think. This is going to have to be like late 80s, early 90s.
Late 80s, early 90s. You're a kid and you're like listening. So you're not that much younger than me. I was a teenager in the 80s. But, when I was looking at music like the Velvet Underground or Parliament Funkadelic in their kind of glory days, or Jimi Hendrix, they weren't that remote. They were like 10 years ago. They were all like doing their thing. You know, you met people in your community who saw them play. Like that that was a cool thing to kind of have as an imprint, because at that time you looked for anything that signified free expression and uh, just rebelliousness and just finding like another way to speak in stifling a stifling kind of late capitalist world that we were living in, and that was really like coming to a head. Mm-hmm. And so I think like a lot of that music got romanticized, but it's also enduring for a reason, because there was a kind of maybe even innocence to it that people relate to, because really it was young people at the time saying the same thing to their parents that you were saying to your dad about Bob Dylan. Like, you don't get this. And then for you, it might have been going to that Black Flag show. And, you know, for somebody like me, it was a little bit of all of those things, like punk rock, hardcore punk, funk music, folk music. All of it was like wide open.
Yeah.
Like, me and the few people I had who I was really like-minded with and who were in my scene, there weren't that many of us who are into all of this shit. And so like we were really like bored by the boundaries that seem to be placed on what you can be into, what you should be listening to, what crew you should be rolling in. It was just really like, no, we decide like we're going to look for anything that like is a spark of life, a spark of like something different than this just this kind of like steel prison of ideas that was just so boring.
Yeah, well, I think this comes up on the show quite often, especially when I think you're just enough older than me that you were a teenager when Reagan became president.
Yeah.
And I was like an infant, all right? And you felt or saw a change. I mean, a lot of people on the show, when I asked them about this, they're like, well, it just didn't feel like much. Like, it got worse as the 80s progressed, but like it didn't feel bad right away necessarily. In the same way that, like, I don't know, it felt bad when Bush was elected, right? "Quote unquote elected." And I don't mean that in a conspiracy way. I mean, literally the Supreme Court stopped the count. But like,
yeah. Absolutely.
Just so we're clear.
Yes.
But the sea change in a way was such that by the time that I started listening to music or choosing music of my own, when I would go back to, say, music that was made in the 60s or 70s, it almost felt quaint in a way that I'm like, oh, isn't that cute? In a way that it felt, and I couldn't articulate it at the time, but I could feel kind of how closed things were getting in the 80s, or being brought up in that. And I'm curious if you could actually feel it then, or if it's only something kind of in retrospect you have thought about.
Oh no, that was part of it. I mean, we didn't have like a lot of, you couldn't vet your choices like you can now. Like, that is one thing that like is its own kind of stifling circumstance for people, because everybody's got to know every fucking thing that's ever happened and be able to talk about it and respond to it and just perform this exegesis about what it all means and where it all goes and how you contextualize it. And then your own thing has got to be like the perfect distillation of a response to it all. And, you know, there's no way that you've listened to all of it and seen all of it and know all of it, because it's like David Lynch said, because you're watching the movie in your fucking phone or whatever. It's like you're not. There's no way. You're like getting like a blip, and that's not a judgment on anybody. It's just like a fact about, like, I think our capacities. Like, we really didn't have the same kind of access. You couldn't just look up have everybody's discography incomplete on your fucking Star Trek phone, you know, and your like wireless headphones and your supercomputer in your pocket. You know, it's like to have like a computer like that, you had to have like a bunch of lab coats and a big government building, and it was a fucking.
They weren't that big in the. Hold on, it wasn't like ENIAC in like 1956, and it takes up like 4 rooms in the middle of the Pentagon.
Come on, it totally was. Just go watch War Games or something. Like it's exactly like it was. It was totally like they didn't have some kid hacking, living in the basement of the Pentagon, turning on the equipment every night and turning it off. Who was into throbbing gristle? It wasn't like that. It was a bunch of like lab coats, and maybe on the West Coast there was some of that stuff going on. But I'm generalizing and I'm ranting. But you know, the thing that interests me about it is that with all the limitations, my point is really we couldn't just know everything, learn everything there is to know about any band that you ever heard of. You know, you relied on your friends who had like a record that you didn't have. It was almost that simple. Like you wanted to hear like Faith or Void or the Bad Brains. You had to like go find the shit. Like if you're a kid and you don't have a car, you got to find your friend who does. So you can go to the cool record store that might not be in your town.
Right.
Like if there's somebody who works in a used record store in your town, like I had one of my good friends who was in bands with me. Like I'd go over there with tapes and just, you know, beg, give me all of those, you know, singles. I want to hear like all the big boy stuff. I want to hear all of the, you know, just hook me up. Like, you have Everything Falls Apart by Husker Du. You have like all of the early Black Flag 7-inches. You have this. And then if you had somebody cool like I had, who was an omnivore, who like knew the shit and had his own point of view. I'm talking about Kenny Hill, who was the drummer of The Hated and started Vermin Scum label. You know, he'd sit there and like make you listen to Thick as a Brick by Jethro Tull and air drum to that shit. Like every note. Like, and you make you listen to it, you know, and then you like listen to the Offenders with him or whatever. Like he was always, and he was into pop and he was into stiff records in England. He was into all this stuff. He was into the Clash. He was into punk music, and you know, he could just kind of school you and turn you on to shit. And he was into dub and reggae and like would listen to that. So all of this information. It had to be personal, and you had to like, once you got that tape, you know, you might not have 6 gigabytes of music on that 90-minute cassette, but you live with that fucking cassette. Like your life depends on that cassette.
I still remember cassettes, but I think the thing that I'm wondering about though is more of the cultural vibe. Did it feel in the 70s? I mean, I guess when are you born?
I'm 69.
69. Okay. So, I mean, you're not really soaking stuff in until, I guess, post Watergate or so.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember sitting and watching Watergate go down on TV with, you know, my parents.
Did you know what was happening, or was it just like, something's going on?
I don't know. I wasn't like, Mom, Dad, can you explain like the geopolitics of like, you know...
Right. Can you tell me about Kissinger? Like, right. But I mean, like, could you...
But, you know, like, I grew up like in a, you know, biracial movement household. Everybody was like aware of things, talking about things. So my childhood, I had consciousness about a lot of things. Growing up in the 70s in Maryland, it was unavoidable. And, you know, I would say that like coming of age in the early 80s was a really dark time for me. It wasn't a like on the up. It was like, it was rough. And, you know, the dynamics in my town were rough, and it wasn't good for me. And
you mean personally, or do you just mean like that the vibe of everything was off?
The vibe was off, and it seemed like we were moving in a climate of increasing intolerance. Maybe it had always been there. It had always been there. but like it had more places to go because people were pressurized during the whole period of the Reagan and Bush 1 years. And I think that, a lot of the stifling of free thought and the fear that people had about like a theocracy emerging in America in a really more pronounced way than ever before. And, like we did feel that and resist it. And kids who stepped outside of it and weren't just, you know, moving along the kind of trajectory that we're all supposed to kind of move along if we fit into the right categories and if we were the right backgrounds, etc. I think that, those who felt outside of that looked for any ways to push back. And, like I was very fortunate to grow up around like DC and Baltimore, and to like get to see at a young age like other young people who are a little bit older than me for the most part, but young people like self-determining their own expression and like saying shit that it spoke to me, and seeing people do it in real time. I mean, that people always talk about like, I saw the Bad Brains in the 80s and this, that it changed my life. People say that a lot. Maybe it's a cliche, but people say it a lot because it's true. Because if you saw that stuff, and especially if you're a brown or black kid who's into heavy music, and you heard that stuff and you saw people like that doing it, you were like, fuck, it's not just like a white boys club. It's not just this thing that can only be this way. And so, for people like me, a lot of my friends, these were ways to, they were empowering and like made you feel like yeah, like I said earlier, like a spark of life, like a sense of like, oh, fuck, these people don't give a fuck what anybody thinks. They're like just doing what they need to do. And they are supporting each other. And it felt like there's a possibility of community.
Yeah.
To me, that was revelatory because we didn't have it in our town. Our town was like more like a few punks, a few freaks. And, it was very stratified along racial lines, black and white. If you were in between those things, you could be a target for any number of reasons. And, like, it was just a wild time to grow up. And I don't know what I would have done if I didn't have access to the music that I did and the art that I did, and finding like-minded friends in my town. Can't believe we all grew up near enough each other that we all just like we all stuck out. Mm-hmm. But we found each other. And, sometimes it would just be like, it would be, oh, you've heard of this band that I like that nobody else has heard of. It's like a secret code. But, I don't think it's completely arbitrary or random. It's like we select kind of how we engage with community and with others, and how we stand in relation to community every day, all the time. Maybe now it's harder to tell, like, well, what does a resistance look like? What is, everything has just kind of been subsumed into this bigger pop culture. And
well,
like
it gets co-opted.
Oh, they're all hipsters, or they're all this, or and people just all are just putting down anybody and everybody, judging them, putting them in a little bracket.
Yeah. Well, capitalism is very good at co-opting and incorporating into itself. Not that it's a thing, but like the structures of it are very good at just absorbing resistance, or even by commodifying resistance to it.
Yes.
It then just becomes another way to spend your money.
Yep.
Is to, I'm going to buy a t-shirt with a resistance slogan on it, or, right. Stuff like that.
Right.
It becomes a fashion statement at some point in the 21st, late 20th, early 21st century.
Sure. I mean, and there's a million ways that plays out, and it's like you say, it's not that it's like a sentient being that's making these phenomenal choices and has these superpowers to absorb. It's a structural, it's a structural, organized, functioning system
Hmm.
that that is very effective at shutting down, you know, uh, free thought, ideas. Absolutely. And some would argue it goes the other way, right? Like some people would just go like, no, free market is a beautiful thing. And they tried to get everybody on that bandwagon for years. Like if everybody just across the world has the new Britney Spears single on their laptop and feels how free that feels, like they're just gonna, embrace democratic principles and, you know, and invest in my great ideas. And but it just ends up like always kind of going back to, you know, who benefits out of it all and who benefits the most and who gets barred from the door.
I mean, take me back to Annapolis. Take me back to like when you really kind of start being conscious of what Annapolis is when you're a kid. You know, how old are you? Are you a teenager at that point?
I was conscious of it to a certain degree. It's like my mother was part of the civil rights movement in our town, and she's immigrant from the Philippines, and she would do all these kind of cool things to try to do community building, and did workshops and like all kinds of things, cool things that I'd hear about, like from people as I was a kid, just walking through the town. People would just like come up to me and say, "Oh, you're Hermes kid," like and tell me about my mother and stuff like that and things she had done. So like I always had this sense of like, oh, I move through this community and like because of my mother and father, I have like entrance into some things that other kids in my class, some of them did, some of them didn't, but I could move more fluidly between worlds just because people were looking out for my mom's kid. So, but sometimes that really benefited me or made me feel secure, made me feel like, oh, maybe this world is better than, maybe things are better. Maybe things can really work. And I think, my parents really had an idealized vision of the world that we would grow up in, that it would, they were modeling something really beautiful that people from different parts of the world, different cultural mappings, completely different lineages in life could come together and have a family and just be like, we're free to like figure out who we are. Nobody is above or lesser. We're just and we're not going anywhere. So I had like a sense of like kind of confidence about who I was, and that got undermined because people couldn't look out for you. And it was a weird climate, it was a weird time. And it's really post-Vietnam, like a lot of PTSD, post-Vietnam culture. The first waves of the civil rights movement had like lost a lot of steam. The Reagan era was a really rough time for like all of this movement. And I don't know if there was just kind of shit that had always been there or not, but there was a lot of violence. There was a lot of things that happened that made me see really quickly that they weren't easy. That if you got targeted, then that was like a really scary fucking thing for a young person to deal with, and you don't have any recourse. You don't know what to do. And if there's like adults doing it in stores where kids are, if there's people who are harassing you or assaulting you and calling you names that are insane and scaring the shit out of you, that changes you. You totally like look around at the world different, and you think like, okay, this is bullshit. And you also want to try to understand, like, how did we get here? Like, how does a kid get to the point that where did they learn the shit that they're saying? Well, and I'm just talking about like really racial targeting and incidents where people are like, ganging up on other kids and being like crazy. And it happened to a lot of people. It happened to me uh, more than enough times for it to shape my existence. And
Hold
so
on,
when I
hold on. I don't need the details. Like, I'm not asking to I'm not like trying to poke it, but like literally adults saying shit to you,
oh yeah,
like not just kids, like actual
not
adults.
just kids, actual adults. Yeah, I got, assaulted by a store owner when I was 13, 12, 13, in a fucking candy store, accused me of stealing things, jacked me up on a wall in front of all the other kids, called me every like name in the book. Like, nobody said anything. Nobody did anything. That was like the place where everybody went after around the corner every day. And then he just built up and built up, and then he lost it, you know. And then we had teachers, who like chased, jumped out of their cars and chased students, friends of mine, and like all kinds of crazy shit. It was really hostile. I think it'd be really a little bit shocking to see some of the things that were just normal then, like corporal punishment in the schools and things like that. I mean, I've kind of gotten into this a few times talking about, especially like with the hated, because just working on that stuff with Numero and finding that just looking at all these songs that I wrote when I was like 15 and 16. And I'm like, it's all about all of the shit. It's all in there. And it's like a lot of it just hasn't changed at all. It's still just like everyday reality for people. And so doing the reunion and singing those songs like a couple of years ago, it really like hit me like there's nothing sentimental about this for me. It feels very like alive. I'm like, shit, this, I hope this like does something, like speaks to somebody, some kid now, like, and they feel like, a little less isolated just from hearing anything that's evidence of times past, times present, where people said something, tried to say something. But we didn't, just write didactic songs and things like that. We always had kind of like this. I think I was really also lucky to have in Hated like a bunch of people who were really like, I think, spiritually compelling, like radical thinkers who, we just kind of supported each other where we were at. And I like look at those songs now and I see that like even some of the worst situations, I could see, oh man, you've been conditioned this way. Like, like that is a tragedy. Like it sucks and it's a tragedy for me that like you're enacting it on me, right? But it's been enacted on you because you don't just like come into this world knowing this shit. You have to learn it. You have to learn like those words. You have to learn why and how you should say them with conviction. And you have to feel entitled to the power that you have to enact violence on other people.
Yeah, sure. I guess in 2025 though, I'm like, I don't know if I have empathy for the adults. Like, sure, there are plenty of adults that are ruining things at the moment who have had tragic childhoods.
Yeah.
They're in their 50s and 60s and 70s. I no longer have empathy. At that point, I'm like, you could have gone to therapy. You could have. Right. There's a lot of things you could have done. at that
Yeah.
point. So that when I asked about the adults, because like sure, like I had like kids say anti-Semitic things to me when I was
I,
growing up, but there was if adults said anything, it was not to my face. So I don't like there's a line there where I'm like I don't know if I have empathy, and this has been a ongoing conversation with my wife and I and many friends of ours. It's like, should we have empathy for the people who, yes, maybe they're adults now, but they had, they were not loved as children. And so they grew up in this twisted way. And I'm like, I don't know if I do, even if it's not, say, the president or unelected folks who are fucking things up, just like a random person who voted for Trump. I'm just like, I don't know if I have empathy. I don't.
I get that. I'm totally respect and I pretty much feel that way a lot of the time as well. I'm also like a old Buddha Dharma person. And so like, the way that I might view that empathy might not extend to, it might not be like giving somebody a pass. It's more just like trying to, in myself and how I like deal with people, because I don't want to just replicate, even in subtle ways, the kind of violence or the kind of like antagonism that's been directed at me in formative ways in my life. Like I'm not gonna like return that to somebody else. I'm gonna try to do something with it. And so like even with the hated, there's this lyric in this song, Picture of Your Mind, that was about a assault and with a bunch of kids. And there's a line in it where it says, each bottle that you break, each bottle that you throw, it's just a picture of your mind. Broken glass you'll leave behind. The blood you spill, it isn't mine. Though I'm on the ground, I'm the hope you never found. So even when I was a kid, I was like looking at those situations and trying just to understand, like, man, this is just going to beget so much trouble for you. Like, that's unfathomable, like world of like suffering. You lose so hard because you just cause and effect is unavoidable. Like you do shit like that, it comes back in multitude of ways. It won't come back in some obvious direct way that we can all go, oh, look, this person got their just desserts. It's just like you can't live with the trauma of enacting violence without having the repercussions of it. And anybody who knows about PTSD or any of those things knows it. Somebody who like is an abuser, one way or another, there's a prison in their mind that they can't escape. And I'm not gonna like, I felt at a really early age, like I want to transform that shit and be about something else. Like, because this is fucking nowhere. This is just like, this doesn't move anything forward for anybody. And, do I forgive? Do I like think that, that person, has like a lot of hope to, become something else? I don't know. But I've definitely encountered people who did crazy shit and did hard shit. A few later in my life who found me, came back, tried to like say something about it. And it was genuine. Like I've lived with the things I said to you, like, and not a lot, a couple times, And so, I look at some of those things and I think like, man, I want to think that people can actually that the book is not closed and that people can actually shift the kind of focus and the trajectory of their life and the conditioning of violence in their mind and things like that. A lot of DC, punks that I was growing up and listening to and seeing, they might have been violent at a certain point and then they just kind of like stopped. They were like, fuck that. Let's dance. Let's be together. Like, it's not fun to like be in a room where everybody's just clocking each other and like attacking each other. And, like that's kind of bullshit too.
Sure. Look, I aspire to your position. I aspire to it. I find it emotionally difficult to get there. But I am curious, is it Buddhism as a spiritual practice? Is that something that you were introduced to when you were younger, or is
Yeah.
it something as an okay, so who in your family, your parents are
Oh, my
raised Buddhist?
sister was interested in meditation and things like that. So like I just got interested in it, and you know, my parents were into like comparative religious training. They had that. They were in education. And you know, so it was just kind of like a wide open set of ideas. It mattered to me that like I read some of those things and they made sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like they had a potency in navigating life from like a early age, and it increased. And you know, so definitely that practice informs the way that like I look at things, not just in the past, but like in the now. And you know, um, but you know, in regard to these kind of questions specifically, like I think we're in such a dark time. Like it's so intense, it's undeniable. And going out and doing this tour with Tsunami and Ida for the last month was like revelatory for me. I think it was really amazing experience. And everywhere we went, I mean, sometimes we just like we would do question and answer periods. It was like like we did question and answers like throughout the show. Like whenever, you know, there was a band finishing setting up and the next band was starting, or you know, little kind of smaller groupings of musicians, because we've all collaborated in different ways over the years, would step in and do a couple songs. Whenever there was a setup changeover, one of us would step up and just be like, questions, what's going on? And you know, sometimes we talked about the reality of fascism, or sometimes we talked about the mass psychology of fascism, or sometimes we talked about art and fascism. Sometimes we talked about like who has good love songs and who doesn't, and just laughed about it, you know. And like sometimes we just sang shit together and remembered things that everybody there, you know, had gathered to connect to, which was music that like helps you get through life and navigate, and just reminds you what's precious in your life. And playing with my friends, meeting up with people who we have collaborated with over decades in every part of the country, and then connecting with some people that we didn't know too well, and then also with people who are from the generation before us. Who, I mean, we played with Clint from Mission of Burma, and you know, I can't imagine, you know, music without what he wrote. You know, we played with Kate from the B-52s the first night of the tour and did 52 Girls. And then it was so powerful that we were like, fuck, we'll do this every night. So every night we did it, you know, like there were just, there were like lots of really powerful experiences we had. But they were absolutely like felt essential. Like this is the best thing we could be doing right now. It's just being with people in a room, listening to music, playing music, talking, laughing, falling apart, and you know, and being real, like with each other. Everybody knows what time it is. Like it's not, you know, we've been singing about it maybe for, you know, 50 years, but everybody knows. It's, we can kind of like, there's no like, how do we parse this? You know, there's no like, you know, equivocating about it. We are in like a time where it just feels very clear that people have to connect based on the things that matter the most to them, and like use all of their intelligence, like
Mhm.
bring all of their intelligence to bear on whatever they do, like art, working like for civil rights, social justice, advocacy. I mean, doctors, medical specialists, researchers, who knew? They're like radical endangered species, teachers, school systems, just
Yeah.
like all of this stuff that, you read about in the 80s. We read Orwell. Like, as we read Orwell and we thought about it. We like listened to The Clash, and it was just like Joe Strummer was like biting Orwell off, just like everywhere he turned.
Right.
It was that. And so we were getting it refracted sometimes, but we're also reading. We started reading Orwell and we started thinking about that. We'd read Walt Whitman and we'd think about that. We'd read Neruda, we'd think about that.
Right. But that's why I asked earlier, I think, about the vibe shift that I think happened through Reagan's America, because I don't think I felt anything as comparably. I don't think I felt that shift before 2025. Things were awful during the Bush era. Things
Yeah.
were awful. I mean, things have been steadily declining, but I think there was like such a change in January.
Yes.
That's what makes me curious about, like, was there a similar kind of feeling that descended upon, like, the fact that punk exploded in the 80s in such a way that it did, as I think, the story that I was told was that it was a response to disco or something like that. And I'm like, sure, I guess so, but it feels more like it was a response to how fucking awful things felt under Reagan, in a more dramatic way than it was like, or a response to Prague. I'm like, I don't know, like, I like both prog and punk. Like, I don't, or like when I make music,
punk and disco too.
right? Yeah,
So,
exactly. Right. I don't make, when I make something, I don't make it as like, oh, this thing sucks, I'm going to make a thing that's a response to that. I make a thing that feels like it should come out of me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, look, I think that sometimes things get really severe and the only response that feels appropriate is a severe response. It's like things get overwhelming and impossible to synthesize in your thinking or to, cohere. And so it makes sense that people become fundamentalist Christians. Shit's like going down all around them. Things is really hard. And then it's just like, okay, just tell me this one thing that's just going to fix it all and make it all work. And, and I'll be okay. And we'll all be okay if we just like do this. And, all I have to do is just like go this narrow way. And so that, the narrowness of it is like a powerful response, an antidote for a lot of people to the mayhem of life and to like the suffering and painfulness of life and the contingencies of life that are out of our control. So you can understand, like I don't agree with that approach. That's not my approach, but I can have some empathy and sympathy for somebody who finds themselves driven to this point where they see nowhere else to go. And so they take a route. Now, like when the route itself is like really limited, or when people don't have tools to disassemble or have critical thinking about what they're being fed, then you run into all kinds of problems. Like I talk to young kids who are educated, privileged, on, very recently, asking them honestly, like, tell me what you think about when you hear the words dislocation, relocation, forced relocation. What do you think about when you hear that? They didn't really have a response. I asked them about the Holocaust. They didn't really learn about it. I asked them about Middle Passage. They didn't really learn about it. So like when you don't have like these basis of agreed upon shared experience and knowledge that is like on the table And we just moved into like this high tech, confirmation bias oriented way of processing information at such a fast rate that it is really it is really different. I agree with you. It is really different. And just like I was trying to say about, like somebody going into a real extreme, narrow, like fundamentalist kind of approach. Similarly, people who like don't know how fascism works out, like it works for a while because people like the bluster. Mussolini was popular. Hitler was fucking huge rock star.
That's how I always describe him. I love to.
His early shit, his early single was, his first demo was really good, man. It was really good. But that's the way that people embraced him as a populist figure with all of the, it's all been said elsewhere. And people either know the history or they don't. They bother to investigate it or they don't. But if they don't know it, then yes, the old adages are as true as they ever were. Whether it's a Hindu proverb of you do what you always done, you're going to get what you always got. Or whether it's you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat it. All these like simple adages that your grandmother said are like fucking true. Still true. Because we are ignorant about all of this stuff. We don't know. And now it's there's such a systematic attempt to overhaul how we know, how we discuss it, that it's almost impossible for people to get trustworthy narrators, trustworthy information. It's really difficult. In a way, I feel like it is kind of like the 80s and like what it was like when the hardcore punk scene was going, because nobody knew. Like you had to, like, maybe you got like Maximum Rock and Roll and you found out what was happening in like this scene in Eastern Europe or this scene in like Austin or Louisville or like, but you wouldn't know otherwise. How could you? If you live on the East Coast, you just got to like rely on somebody who moves there and goes, yeah, there was this cool band and I lived there. And like it
right.
But it's basically like the underground is just like a handful of people. And to me, this is like, it's hard to think, oh, we have to reinvent this wheel and this wheel. We don't, but people should, without romance, like remember that incredible things start small. Like people should be inspired when they look at like what happened with punk rock or with disco or with like hip hop, R&B, things that started in house parties became block parties, became, like sound systems, became like megaphones for ideas that displayed like things that gave people like sense of pride, sense of purpose, sense of energy, sense of like joy. And like, that's its own kind of radical praxis. It's not everything, but it's like, we need all hands on deck to do fucking anything to like to deal with something with this much money behind it, this much like unbelievable, unchecked, unexamined power just running rampant through everything.
But I mean, like, here's the thing. When you start playing music, when you're in punk bands in the 80s in Annapolis, right?
Yeah.
Are you thinking this is something I'm going to do with my life? Or are you just like, this is a response to what I'm feeling? And I can say this, I fall into this trap a lot on this show where I talk about music as expression, as emotional expression. Right. And then I have some musicians who are just like, well, no, that's not how I feel about it. And I'm like, okay, but I will say this. I feel like you can say that about a lot of punk and about a lot of hardcore, that it is a response to what is going on, especially lyrically, and especially in the way the music's made. So I feel like I can state that pretty accurately. Yeah. Are you thinking this is just, I'm feeling this in the moment, I need to get this energy out in some way, this is a fun way to do this? Or are you thinking, hey, this is the beginning of like a lifelong practice? Or are you thinking I could do this?
That's a good question. I don't think I knew. I think like in a kind of young adolescent way, like me and my friends, me and the other people in the hated, maybe we like had ideas when we first started playing together of like, oh man, we could go out and tour all the time and like, this could happen, that could happen. But mostly we were semi weird, kind of monastic about it. We're just like, this is like so like everything in our life depends on it. Everything is in this basement. And, like um the language we used, it was our own, like the way we moved, the way that we uh thought about shit, talked about shit, um, the things that we turned each other on to. There was this sense of like definite purpose about it. Was it driven by a marketplace? No, we had no idea like what that kind of looked like. Were we conditioned by like um, people who maybe did independent labels like Discord, in their example, things like they could do? Yeah, we were inspired and influenced by it, but we couldn't quite, replicate that. We didn't have like the means, we didn't have the skills, the ability. We had a small label, we put out stuff that was happening in our scene.
Mm.
And, like, so I look at it as like, because I grew up in like a musical family, my whole family played. Um, I really see music as just like a life, like an element, like one of the main elements. Like it's earth, water, fire. It's like it all. It's in the soup, and so I can't ever remember a time where I would imagine there not being music as being like an essential component of like how I live, engage with friends and family. And when I started writing, I never stopped.
Mm-hmm.
So like, not entirely, I did take like some time where I just played with other people and didn't write as much. But even then I was like writing. And I think that, um, I was never thinking in a kind of career mentality. It was a subtler kind of just like, this is life, like as I know it. And I didn't have like a family structure that was like shutting that down. Like they weren't going like, no, you need to be this. They were being like, okay, you're doing this thing and we respect it. And that's awesome. That's good.
Were there any signals from them like you should have something in your back pocket to do? Or was it always just like, hey, do what you want, and then you just kept following that pathway?
Well, they were educators, so there was absolutely, like I had opportunity to like have through them to like be able to go to school and have, because my father taught in a college, there was like ways that they would help me if I chose to do a college degree, and I did it. It took me a while, but I did it.
Did you want to? Or was it more like you were satisfying their desires?
No, I wanted to not lose this opportunity. And I knew about like the value of it because I had educators as, public education that I grew up with, like, in some ways it paled because the discussions that were had in my community and my family community and like the way that we talked about stuff was so like, oh, okay, this is like how adults can talk to kids. This is how people can be like, there can be like any question can be on the table. So I was incredibly like fortunate in that respect. And so like I always saw it as an opportunity, and I definitely had this idea of like, once I started seeing that idea, that I don't know if I read it in Malcolm X's book the first time, the idea of, master's tools to dismantle the master's house. That idea, I felt like I might not like the canonical world of liberal education as it is, but if I don't have some of these tools, how am I going to be able to, function within this world? And I really wanted to like learn as much as I could. And I didn't want anybody to be able to like, um, I wanted to be able to like make an argument for anything that I cared about, like to be able to advocate for it in language. And so I became very determined to do that, to like learn how to like just shut down something or open something up, represent myself well. Like that became really important to me, because like one of the things that was a problem for me is like, I had older friends who were into turning me on to like the punk music and all the good stuff and everything like that. They were a little further along, and I could play really good, but it took me a while to like find a way to not, to get out of my own head. And also I was like a self-destructive kid. So like,
what do you mean?
Took me a while to get, I mean, some of the things that happened when I was younger was just a response to a lot of the things we were talking about earlier. I really like went into some dark places as a teenager, and music really pulled me out of that, because you couldn't really be in a band. You couldn't be like just stoned to the point of, non-activity and play in the hated. Well,
I mean, we're right at the end, and I'm just curious because the kind of arc that you have drawn for me is that, well, like, okay, I am curious, how oppressive was the racism in Annapolis at the time? Because it feels like it was omnipresent from the way you described, but like, are there, outside of like your home, are there contexts? Is it just the punk scene that where you feel accepted, or is it just like walking around, you kind of like, you kind of feel like it is there? And I ask this because I am curious about, it seems like the way you described it, like you said, kind of self-destructive stuff, like you were dulling the stuff with, you were getting high and dulling it so that you didn't feel it.
Yeah.
And then you get in a punk band, you're able to deal with some things there. And I'm wondering if that was if it was kind of spiritual practices like Buddhism that kind of helped you, also therapy. I'm curious of like, what was the atmosphere, and then how do you eventually as an adult deal with it?
Great. I wish I could actually like adequately answer that. Such a amazing question to be asked. Really, I would say, just a few things. Yes to all of that. Like being in bands, developing a spiritual practice that was a contemplative, meditative practice from an early age, which I consider to be like a great fortune in my life. Having allies, being able to be vulnerable with people who, can see you and get you and have your back. The town I lived in was stratified. It was very black and white. It was a very kind of apartheid setup. And like in the 80s, the historical Black community that was in downtown Annapolis got moved out. So it's like you saw kind of the end of all of these things happening at one time in Annapolis. Like there used to be movie theaters and old movie theaters in downtown Annapolis, and by the mid 80s they were gone. There used to be, markets, and the Black community lived downtown and had some of the old apartments over by the market house, and that all gradually got harder, more pressurized, harder and harder for people to remain and to
like
live.
Specifically redlined, or was it just that they were priced out?
I think there's probably more priced out. Maybe people who were in power in the community really wanted to have a manicured tourist town, and they like did everything they could to make it harder for people. I don't know about the politics of it at that time. I just saw it happen.
Mm.
It's just like, and all of us saw it happen. And after I was in Hated, I got to play in funk bands with funk musicians who grew up in Annapolis and had a whole different kind of like experience of what music could be, what art could be. And they grew up going to see P Funk and Graham Central Station and Mother's Finest. And, our drummer like met James Brown in Annapolis when he was a kid. There was a historical place that had begun kind of almost as a juke joint. It was called Cars Beach. And it's not there anymore, but it's a historical landmark, and everybody played there. It became like the epicenter of black music, like for the whole DMV, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. And people would just come, and there'd be just cars, for miles, like people would come. And the story that I heard was that the time that our drummer Dada met James Brown, his mother just walked over to Mr. Brown and said, I'd like you to meet my child. And he was just there because it was the place to be on a Saturday night. And he had been playing in DC the night before and just came to Annapolis to hang out with the people. So it's like, but everybody played there. Otis Redding played there. Billie Holiday played there. And then in the 70s, P-Funk and the Mothers of Invention even played there. So it's like all kinds of things, like weird things like happen. And so when I talked to them and played with them, like they schooled me in so much. Like I learned so much about funk music and playing it, and they really pushed me as a guitar player and as like a human towards just like seeing sanity like in action. Like at that time, I think that they felt like when they were kids, everybody had a guitar on their back, everybody like had an instrument. And it was during the height of like early of the first kind of profusion of, I guess, like talking like Public Enemy and Native Tongue and all that happening. So, they were like kind of going like, let's do P-Funk music at the Union Hall for all the kids. Like, because they're kids, they were older than me. They're like, they're not walking around with instruments. They love this music, but they might not know where it comes from. Like, we listen to like this PE record, and you can hear Sly, you can hear P-Funk, you can hear James Brown, you can hear all this music. They were just like, let's do it. Like, let's play. And we did it for a couple of years, and it was just like one of the greatest experiences I ever had in that town. And it was just people dancing and being together and playing music all night. And so, I guess to like kind of get down to it, like how that all translates into trying to be an adult human.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a parent. I have a grown daughter who's an amazing musician, writer, singer. My family are all still like playing music, involved in all kinds of things in our community for many years. And I just feel like you can't underestimate the value of really seeing your own joy in relationship to what you do. Like if you make art and music and things like that, like there's a lot of people who can do things really well, might be technically monsters, but they don't have so much joy with it, and they don't feel like this like love for it. I think that you really get sustained, and you can really tell when people like love doing something together, love doing what they're doing. You know, you were talking, I think you talked about playing at CMJ once, and I remember Jenny Toomey, my friend who's in Tsunami and who played in bands with me, and
Former guest on the show, Jenny Toomey.
yeah, she's one of my best friends in the world. And you know, when I think about how she uh, we did like CMJ one year, and Patti Smith was like a keynote speaker, and she had just made this record that was all these songs that were about like mourning the loss of Fred Sonic Smith and her husband and Robert Mapplethorpe and her brother. All of them died like within a very short period of time. And she made this record, Gone Again, and came out of kind of retirement. She was just like raising her kids and living her life in Detroit. And so she put this record out, and everybody was saying, "Oh, this is so amazing." And I saw her do one of the first shows she did back, and it was amazing. It was incredible. And Jenny told me that Patty had gone on like the biggest radio station in New York City, like the biggest pop rock radio station in New York City. I don't know what it is, but the DJ was a famous one. Got up and got on the air, and I guess like he had this discussion with Patty, where off the mic, where he said, "This record is the best thing you've done. I'm so moved to hear it. I listen to it every day. I'm your biggest fan. To be here, you know, hanging out with you is like mind blowing. And I just got to tell you, I'm so upset, but I can't play this record on my radio station. Like the way that the playlisting was happening and how it was determined what could be played rendered it impossible for him, even as a famous, powerful, successful DJ, to play such a record for people that listen to him every day." And Patty just looked at him and was like, "Well, thanks, but you should get another job." And that was a rough thing to say, but at the same time, she was just like kind of telling the fucking truth. Like, if you are doing everything you can in this, you know, this is like, this means this much to you, and you can't, you don't have any freedom to like say what you're about and what you're down with, and you have you have the mic on you, the biggest platform like in the Western world, and you can't just say what you just said to me. Maybe you should be doing something else. Maybe you should do something where you can like just say some of those kind of things. And, you know, like, I mean, maybe that's like a severe kind of response, but I think embedded in it is actually like a compassionate thing, because it's really like, I think she really saw and heard the sincerity in this person. I don't know who it was. I'm not calling it out. I'm just, you know, saying like, I think she saw the sincerity in this person and like really wanted to mirror it and be like, I really hear that. Maybe you should be doing something where you can like be living from that.
Right.
Because,
It wasn't
like,
shady. It wasn't shady.
No,
She was
quit your job, get another job. It wasn't like that. I mean, I think it's just like, it's a good question actually to kind of like move to the end of this, or, you know, discussion or whatever, is like, you know, why do you do what you do? Like, if what you're about is just power, there's a whole bunch of people who are just going for that. If you just want power of others and you just want to like flip the bird at anybody who's like a weak little, you know, non-alpha male, like you want to like just have, you know, an architecture that's just Trump Towers around the world, just phallocentric discourse and full relief. Like, that's what it's all about. If you just want to like subjugate people and scare people and relocate people and terrorize people because of like their religion, their background, their beliefs, their politics, fuck you. fuck you. Get it? If that's what you want to do it. But for the rest of us, we got to do jobs. We got to do work with our hands and our minds, and our love. That just because that has a resonance and people respond to it. People hear it and they still respond to it. People respond to people, coming for real.
Daniel, it seems like a beautiful place to end. Thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely, man. It's been good to meet you.
Genuine delight to talk to you. And we'll see you next time. Bye. Bye, oh, 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 bye.